Good evening, my friends. After the power crisis in Texas back in February, I took it upon myself to begin preparing my family for any future electrical grid issues we might face. I went out and purchased a gas generator, and I just finished doing my research on solar power generators. Now, the reason I share this with you is that we need to prepare now for blackouts and brownouts that may be in our future if the country goes completely green, some Texas experts are saying. Okay, my friends, let's take a closer look at this story and a few others together. Welcome to the Eye Opener. I'm your host, Michael Lewis. The far-left climate policies pursued by President Joe Biden could lead to massive blackouts and power outages across the country while bringing the worst inflation to hit the country in 30 years. Take a look at the left-leaning views of his cabinet or his nominees. I believe you may also agree with our observations. The nominee for controller of the currency, Soleil Omarova, admitted that she wants to combat climate change by putting coal, oil, and gas companies out of business. Biden's special U.S. climate envoy, John Kerry, who has interest with the Chinese Communist Party, seemed to agree with Omarova when he told the COP26 conference in Glasgow, Scotland, earlier this month that there would be no coal in the U.S. by 2030. Carol Roth, author of The War on Small Business, explains what the experts say you can do to prepare your family for a possible coming blackout. It's interesting. Usually when I go out and talk to experts in areas that are not 100% core to my area of expertise, and I say, I would like to give you credit, usually I get, okay, here's how you credit me. But now everyone is like, no. Let me tell you what happened. Just don't use my name. And this is across the country. Ross said, this isn't just a California issue, which obviously California is leading the nation, but even experts out of Texas, people who are monitoring the electric grid, are incredibly concerned about the brownouts or blackouts now already. So forget about 2030. She went on to say that wanting to have a backup power source, whether it's propane, diesel, or a combination generator, is something you want to be prepared to have. Because in some states like Texas, once the state loses power, it will take at least 2 weeks to get the plant back up and running before customers are able to use grid power again. Therefore, there is something we should start planning and preparing for. Since the George Floyd case, far-left progressives have pushed a defund the police campaign. Most recently, Representative Rashida Tlaib, a progressive elected during the wave of Democratic victories in 2018, defended her proposed bill called the Breathe Act. It would require the Department of Justice to develop a roadmap for prison abolition. That would empty federal prisons within 10 years, with no exceptions for extremely violent offenders, drug lords, or sex traffickers. Anti-police protests across the country turned into riots in 2020, with far-left New York City Democratic Mayor Bill de Blasio taking the lead, proposing a $1 billion cut to the NYD's roughly $6 billion budget. Members of the Gang of Four, a group of young leftist progressives, including Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, and Ayanna Pressley, actively promoted anti-police and anti-prison initiatives, calling for no more policing, incarceration, and militarization. They don't want cuts in police funding, they want the elimination of police funding. When Democrats suffered less than stellar returns in the 2020 House elections, some Democrats blamed the results on the anti-police rhetoric of these progressives, but they still actively support the Defund the Police campaign. Omar's district was at the center of the anti-police riot in the summer of 2020 when she encouraged protesters to stay in the streets and show them we're taking action. But the campaign was far from popular with Biden, Democratic senators, and the Congressional Black Caucus, who rejected the rhetoric altogether. The president does not support abolishing prisons. He thinks measures like that will make us less safe, obviously. And he would not support legislation that includes it, said Press Secretary Jen Psaki. Biden's stance will pose a challenge to progressives who want to actually make substantive reforms at the federal level. Senator John Cornyn introduced an amendment to provide additional federal funding to police departments. The proposal had the support of both Republicans and Democrats in a rare unanimous vote. Senator Joe Manchin spoke out strongly against anti-police rhetoric. He wrote, "Defund the police? Defund my butt. I'm a proud West Virginia Democrat. We are the party of working men and women. We want to protect Americans' jobs and health care. We do not have some crazy socialist agenda, and we do not believe in defunding the police. The Senate's foremost leftist progressive, Senator Bernie Sanders, has made it clear that he supports efforts to reform police departments across the United States, but has rejected efforts to cut or abolish them. 6 people have died so far, including an 8-year-old boy, in the attack on a Christmas parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin, on November 21st. Daryl Brooks appeared in court on November 23rd to face 5 counts of intentional homicide, and if convicted, he could face up to 5 life sentences. Bail has been set at $5 million, making it impossible for him to go free. As usual, the attack was immediately characterized as a traffic accident by many in the left media, in yet another attempt to confuse right and wrong. The views he shared on social media gave the public a chance to understand the dark side of the man, who now stands accused of killing 6 innocent people. Brooks' posts include pro-Hitler and anti-Semitic rhetoric, multiple anti-police tirades, and threats against white people. In one post he wrote, "When we start knocking white people down, I want to hear old white people knocking white people down." Brooks also shared a meme titled, "Hitler knew who the real Jews were," a memo that propagated the absurd theory that Hitler's evil was due to knowing that blacks were the real Hebrews and committing massacres like this. It also claimed that the U.S. had put fake white Jews into the state of Israel, and that World War III would come once people realized that Hitler was right and killed 6 million innocent people in a genocide. Other posts show Brooks agreeing with Colin Kaepernick's call for a revolution, slamming Wisconsin Republicans and suggesting that white people are the real barbarians. These social media posts provide information that completely refutes the mainstream media's claim that Brooks is improperly tied to Black Lives Matter movement and organization. In fact, some of those posts promoted Black Lives Matter. This is part of the reason why these legacy media outlets did not focus on him as a suspect. The left-wing mainstream media failed in their disinformation plot after spending months wrongly insisting that Kyle Rittenhouse was a representative of racist evil. Brooks has clearly shown himself to be an evil racist in his online views. He used his SUV to kill innocent men and women and children. But this has been proven to be a violent, racist, anti-Semitic, pro-BLM suspect who clearly does not fit the image mainstream media is trying to portray him as. After negotiations with OPEC producer Saudi Arabia to increase production failed, President Joe Biden joined the major crude oil consuming countries in releasing oil reserves in the hope of quickly calming oil prices. But international crude oil futures defied the U.S.-led coalition to lower oil prices, jumping up after a brief decline. In the overnight session, West Texas Intermediate crude oil and UK Brent crude oil staged a strong reversal, with West Texas reversing its almost 2% intraday loss to rise 2.28% to $78.50 per barrel, the highest closing level in the last 3 sessions. Brent crude, which fell more than 1% during the day, rose 3.27% to $82.31 a barrel, a new closing high since last Tuesday, November 16th. In the face of rising global energy prices, the U.S. government announced on Tuesday that it would release 50 million barrels of strategic oil reserves and sent requests to major global oil consumers such as Japan and India, urging them to release their respective countries' reserves to curb the continued rise in crude oil prices. Earlier this month, the Biden administration's call for OPEC to accelerate production was rejected. Instead, OPEC is sticking to its plan to increase production slowly. UBS, a Swiss investment bank, expects that OPEC may not increase production even in January. So why did oil prices rise even after Biden's coalition to lower oil prices drew on oil reserves? A Goldman Sachs analysis said that because the release of strategic oil reserves has been fully priced into the market already, it could instead push up oil prices next year. The reason is that the release of crude oil reserves by the U.S. would see over 100 million barrels of crude oil enter OECD inventories, which would far exceed the likely release. The impact of this release of the U.S. strategic oil reserves will be short-lived. It is demand that will ultimately determine the price of oil. Moreover, the release of oil reserves is not sustainable. The pattern of slow supply growth and continued demand recovery in the crude oil market has not changed, and oil prices are likely to remain high and volatile. There is another reason why. The size of the U.S. release of strategic oil reserves is actually a drop in the bucket. The U.S. consumes 20 million barrels of oil per day, and may in turn reduce OPEC's willingness to expand production capacity. High inflation, high oil prices, and energy dependence are just some of the many headaches facing the Biden administration. To address these problems, President Joe Biden has released strategic oil reserves as a means of calming oil prices. But this situation is largely of Biden's own making. As we have seen, his first executive order after taking office canceled the Keystone XL pipeline project with Canada. Restoring the pipeline would be one of the easiest ways to curb high oil prices. Senator Joe Manchin, a moderate Democrat who is chairman of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, was one of those who suggested that the president do so. He responded to Biden's move to release the reserve by saying that it was an important policy band-aid on rising prices, but would not address the self-inflicted wounds that short-sighted energy policies have inflicted on the nation. Manchin also reiterated his concerns about another inflation issue that has hit Americans really hard: historic inflationary taxes and the lack of comprehensive, all-encompassing energy policy pose a clear and present threat to America's economic and energy security. He called on President Biden to responsibly increase domestic energy production and reverse course to allow the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline, which would supply the country with up to 900,000 barrels of oil per day from Canada, one of the U.S.'s closest allies. Manchin stressed that this is about America's energy independence and the fact that hard-working Americans should not be dependent on foreign countries for energy security, but rather focus on the real challenges facing the country in the future. While the Americans are suffering from the worst inflation in 30 years, stagnant U.S. economic growth, a supply chain crisis, and a record 10 million unfilled jobs, the Federal Reserve is focused on tackling climate change in order to appease the radical left. Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, who was just nominated for a second term by President Biden, has made it clear that under his leadership, the Fed will put climate change at the top of its agenda. Indeed, President Biden believes the Fed should redirect from its mission of promoting the stability, integrity, and efficiency of the nation's monetary, financial, and payment system to facilitate optimal macroeconomic performance. He wants the Fed to make climate change its top priority. On November 3rd, the Fed issued a statement. Climate change poses significant challenges for the global economy and financial system, with implications for the structure of economic activity, the safety and soundness of financial institutions, and the stability of the financial sector more broadly. It added that a consistent global response by the international community and the private sector could deal with the financial and economic implications of climate change. As can be seen, the Fed is not declaring war on inflation and all the other problems facing the U.S. economy, but prefers to use its bandwidth and resources to fight so-called climate change. In fact, the Fed's policy of endless money printing and ultra-low interest rates is complicit in the spike in inflation, and it should be addressing the problems it has created first. Many Republican lawmakers are preventing the Fed from moving to left-leaning policies. In a letter to Powell, they wrote, "We question the purpose and effectiveness of climate-related bank regulation and scenario analysis, particularly because the Fed lacks jurisdiction and expertise in environmental matters." The Republican lawmakers added that addressing climate change has no basis in science or economics, but is a self-fulfilling prophecy. They claim that energy exploration and other unpopular investments are financially risky. But polls all show that people are more concerned with specific economic issues, especially inflation, than with esoteric and controversial issues like climate change. So the serious problems are not fundamentally the result of external factors, but of a series of left-leaning policies by the Biden administration. If these policies continue, the American people will suffer even more, and that is never good for the Democratic Party. And that's it for today, my friends. Check out the playlist right here for more eye-opening content. You can join me in the Eye Opener Telegram chat room and follow me on Newmaker, Gab, Parler, and Getter. Now don't forget, please sign up to the email list so that we can stay in touch. I'd like to thank you all, and I'll see you next time.